What pregnancy side effect does no one talk about? I woke up to find another bandage on my arm, this time on the inside of my elbow. Honey, did you draw blood from me again? Adriana rolled over, her 7 months pregnant belly making the movement difficult. I'm sorry. I tried not to. But the craving hit around 3 a.m. and I couldn't stop myself. This was the 4th time in 2 weeks. Small puncture wounds, expertly done. My wife was a phlebotomist before taking maternity leave, so she knew exactly how to draw blood without waking me. But knowing how didn't explain why. Adriana, this isn't normal, even for pregnancy. She started crying, but these weren't hormonal tears. These were desperate, frightened sobs that shook her whole body. I know it's not normal. Do you think I want this? Do you think I enjoy feeling like a monster? We need to tell Dr. Holland. No! She grabbed my hand with both of hers, her grip surprisingly strong. They'll think I'm insane. They'll take the baby. They'll lock me up. The cravings had started subtly in her 2nd trimester. First, she wanted rare steaks. The bloodier, the better. I'd joke about the baby being a little carnivore. Then came the raw meat. I'd found her in the kitchen at 2 a.m. once, eating uncooked ground beef straight from the package, juice dripping down her chin. She'd been mortified, blamed pregnancy hormones, promised it wouldn't happen again. But last month, everything changed. She'd cut her finger while chopping vegetables for dinner. Instead of running it underwater, she'd sucked on it. The look of relief on her face, the way her eyes had rolled back slightly, the small moan of satisfaction, it had chilled me to my core. That's when she'd broken down and confessed. She craved blood, specifically human blood, more specifically, mine. You taste right, she'd whispered that night. Other blood doesn't work. I tried animal blood from the butcher. It made me sick. But yours makes the craving stop. Now I demanded answers. Show me where you keep the supplies. She reluctantly led me to our bathroom closet. Hidden behind towels and toilet paper was a small medical kit. Sterile needles, collection tubes, alcohol swabs, tourniquets, professional equipment from her old job that she'd somehow smuggled home. And in our mini fridge, between her face masks and prenatal vitamins, 3 vials of my blood, each labeled with dates from the past week. How long have you been storing it? 2 weeks? I thought if I had some saved, I could control it better. Just a small sip when the craving hit. Like medicine. But it's getting worse. I need more each time. I noticed she was paler than usual, despite the blood consumption. Her hands shook slightly. Dark circles under her eyes suggested more than just pregnancy insomnia. She looked sick, truly sick, in a way that terrified me. We're going to the doctor. Now. Please, just let me explain. No, get dressed. We're going. At the hospital, I expected Dr. Holland to laugh or immediately call for a psychiatric consult. Instead, she listened carefully, asked detailed questions, and ordered immediate blood work. When the results came back an hour later, her face was grave. Adriana, you're severely anemic. Your iron levels are critically low, but that's not the concerning part. She pulled up lab results on her computer, pointing to numbers that meant nothing to me, but clearly alarmed her. You have a condition called pica, craving non-food items. But specifically, you have a rare variant that occurs in pregnancy where the body craves human blood due to a severe deficiency in multiple nutrients. So she's not going crazy? No. Her body is desperately trying to get iron, B12, folate, and several other nutrients in the most bioavailable form it knows, blood. The pregnancy has depleted her reserves to dangerous levels. The baby is essentially parasitizing her nutrients. Without intervention, both Adriana and the baby are at risk. Adriana's relief was palpable. She began crying again, but these were tears of relief. It's medical? It's real? I'm not losing my mind? Very real, and very dangerous. You're at risk for severe complications, organ failure, hemorrhaging during delivery, even death. We need to admit you immediately for intravenous iron infusions and comprehensive nutrient replacement. As they prepared Adriana's room, she confessed more. The cravings came in waves, strongest at night. She'd researched vampire mythology obsessively, convinced she was turning into a monster. She'd even written goodbye letters to me and the baby, planning to check herself into psychiatric care before she hurt someone. The worst part, she whispered as they inserted her IV, was that it worked. After drinking your blood, I felt better. The baby moved more. I knew it was wrong, but it was the only thing that helped. I felt like I was going insane. Dr. Holland explained that in severe cases like Adriana's, the body's desperation for nutrients could override normal disgust responses. 3 days of intensive IV treatments later, Adriana's color returned. She delivered our daughter Emma at 38 weeks. The nightmare was over. Until 6 months later, when I woke up to find Adriana standing over Emma's crib with a needle in her hand. The cravings came back, Adriana whispered, not looking at me. But this time, they're not for your blood. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. I lunged forward and snatched the needle from her hand, my fingers closing around the plastic barrel before my brain fully processed what I was doing. Emma lay in her crib, still asleep, her tiny chest rising and falling in the dim glow of the nightlight. I scooped her up with my other arm, pulling her against my chest so fast her blanket stayed behind in the crib. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat, in my ears, everywhere. Adriana didn't try to stop me. She just stood there frozen, tears already streaming down her face, her mouth forming the words, "I'm sorry," over and over, but barely making any sound. I backed toward the door, keeping my eyes on her, Emma warm and solid against me. She stirred but didn't wake up, her little fist curling against my t-shirt. Adriana's hands were shaking, reaching toward us but not moving forward, and she kept whispering those same words, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry," like if she said it enough times it would undo what I'd just seen. I made it to the hallway and slammed Emma's door shut behind me. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the needle, so I stuck it in my pocket and fumbled with our bedroom door, got us inside, locked it. Emma started crying then, confused and scared by the sudden movement and my racing heartbeat under her ear. I grabbed my phone off the nightstand with my free hand and pulled up Dr. Watkins' contact info. She'd given us her emergency line when Adriana was pregnant, told us to call anytime day or night if something felt wrong. I hit the call button, and it rang once, twice, 3 times, while I bounced Emma gently, trying to calm her down. Dr. Watkins answered, sounding groggy but alert, asking what was wrong, and I tried to explain, but the words came out jumbled and panicked. I told her I found Adriana standing over Emma's crib with a needle, that the cravings came back, that she said it wasn't my blood she wanted this time. There was a pause, maybe 2 seconds, where I could hear Dr. Watkins taking a breath, and when she spoke again, her voice was different, calm but firm and completely awake. She said we needed to get Adriana to the emergency room immediately, right now, no waiting. I asked if I should drive her and Dr. Watkins said no, absolutely not. I needed to call 911 because this required both medical and psychiatric evaluation, and I shouldn't try to transport her myself. She explained fast, talking over Emma's crying, that postpartum recurrence of Adriana's condition was rare, but possible, and the fact that she was targeting Emma instead of me suggested something had changed, something neurological or psychological that needed immediate professional assessment. She told me to hang up and call 911 right now, and she'd meet us at the hospital. I ended the call and just stood there for a second, Emma crying against my shoulder, my phone in my hand, trying to process that I was about to call the police on my wife. I heard Adriana outside the bedroom door, not trying the handle but just sitting there, I think, because I could hear her crying through the wood. I dialed 911, and a woman answered asking what my emergency was, and I had to say the words out loud, had to tell this stranger that my wife tried to draw blood from our infant daughter. The dispatcher's voice changed immediately, became urgent and focused, asking if the baby was injured, if my wife was still a threat, if there were weapons in the house. I answered no, just medical supplies, and she said units were being dispatched, stay on the line, keep the baby with me, don't open the door until officers arrived. I unlocked the bedroom door because I needed to see Adriana, needed to know she was okay, even though nothing about this was okay. She was sitting on the bathroom floor across the hall, her back against the tub, knees pulled up to her chest, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. The dispatcher heard me moving and asked what I was doing, told me to stay in the locked room, but I said my wife wasn't going to hurt anyone. She was falling apart, and I couldn't just leave her alone like that. 15 minutes felt like an hour, Emma finally settling down in my arms while I sat on the edge of our bed, watching Adriana through the open doors, listening to sirens getting closer. Our quiet street filled with flashing red and blue lights, and I walked downstairs with Emma, opened the front door to 2 paramedics and 2 police officers standing on our porch. The neighbors' lights were coming on across the street. One paramedic, a woman maybe in her 40s, asked where my wife was, and I pointed upstairs, told them the bathroom. They headed up while one officer stayed with me asking basic questions, name, address, what happened, and I explained it all again, showed him the needle from my pocket. The other officer went upstairs, and I heard him talking to Adriana in that calm cop voice they use, asking her to stand up, checking if she had any other sharp objects on her. The female paramedic came back down and asked me to show her where Adriana kept her supplies, so I led her to Emma's room and pointed at the changing table. The officer who'd stayed with me put on gloves and opened the drawer under the table, and my stomach dropped when I saw what was inside. More needles, still in their sterile packaging, alcohol wipes, a tourniquet, collection tubes. All of it hidden right there, right under where I changed Emma's diaper every day, and I'd never noticed. I felt sick, thinking about how long she'd been planning this, stashing supplies within reach of our daughter's crib while I was at work, or asleep, or just not paying attention. The officer took photos of everything with his phone, then carefully removed each item and put it in an evidence bag. Upstairs, I could hear the paramedics talking to Adriana, their voices gentle but professional, asking when the cravings started, if she'd hurt herself or anyone else, if she was taking any medications. Adriana's voice was quiet, shaky, admitting the urges came back about 3 weeks ago. She said she fought them, tried to ignore them, but they got stronger every night until tonight, when the compulsion became so overwhelming around 2 a.m. that she couldn't stop herself. The male paramedic asked if she'd actually drawn any blood, and she said no. I stopped her before she could, and I heard the relief in her voice mixed with the shame. They brought her downstairs on shaky legs, and when she saw me holding Emma, she started crying again, reaching toward us. The female paramedic gently redirected her toward the door, explaining they needed to take her to the hospital for evaluation, and Adriana went without resistance, just kept looking back at us. One officer asked if I wanted to ride in the ambulance, but I said no, I'd follow in my car with Emma. They loaded Adriana into the back, and I watched the ambulance pull away, lights flashing but no siren, and then I was buckling Emma into her car seat with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The drive to the hospital felt strange and disconnected, like I was watching myself do it from somewhere outside my body. I followed the ambulance through empty streets, traffic lights blinking yellow at intersections, Emma sleeping peacefully in the back seat. She had no idea her mother had been standing over her crib with a needle minutes ago. No idea that everything in our lives just changed. The ER entrance was bright and cold when I carried Emma inside, and a nurse met me right away, saying they'd taken Adriana straight back for assessment. She led me to a family waiting room with uncomfortable chairs and old magazines, and a TV playing the news with no sound. Emma woke up around 3:30 a.m., hungry and confused about why we weren't home, and I made her a bottle from the diaper bag with hands that trembled so much I spilled formula powder on the floor. I fed her sitting in one of those plastic chairs, watching her little face while she drank, trying to process what just happened and what came next. The bottle was almost empty when Dr. Watkins pushed through the waiting room doors, still wearing sweatpants and a jacket thrown over what looked like pajama top, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She sat down next to me and explained what was happening, speaking quietly so she wouldn't wake Emma, who'd fallen back asleep against my shoulder. They were running complete blood work on Adriana right now, checking her iron, ferritin, B12, folate, and a bunch of other nutrient levels, plus a full metabolic panel to rule out other medical causes. Dr. Watkins looked tired but focused, and she kept her hand on my arm while she talked, like she was trying to anchor me to something solid. Around 5 a.m., a man in his late 30s came into the waiting room, introducing himself as Dr. Powell, a psychiatrist who specialized in perinatal mental health and postpartum complications. He shook my hand and sat down across from us, his voice calm and direct, explaining that they needed to figure out if this was purely medical, purely psychiatric, or some combination that required treatment for both. He said the next few hours would involve a lot of testing and evaluation, and he'd keep me updated as they learned more. Dr. Powell pulled out a tablet and started asking questions about Adriana's behavior over the past 6 months, wanting specifics about sleep patterns and eating habits and mood changes. I shifted Emma in my arms and tried to remember details, explaining that Adriana had seemed more tired lately, but I figured that was normal with a 6-month-old who still woke up twice a night. He asked about intrusive thoughts, and I had to admit I didn't know, because she hadn't mentioned anything like that to me. The questions kept coming, and I found myself describing things I hadn't paid much attention to before, like how Adriana had been checking the refrigerator at odd hours, when I got up for Emma's night feedings, or how she'd seemed paler the past few weeks, even though she was taking her vitamins. Dr. Powell typed notes on his tablet and asked if she'd mentioned any specific triggers for the cravings, any patterns to when they were strongest. I told him about finding her at the crib around 2 a.m., and he nodded like that timing meant something important. He wanted to know if she'd been isolating herself or avoiding certain situations, and I realized she had stopped going to her postpartum support group about a month ago, saying she was too tired. Each answer I gave seemed to fit into some pattern he was tracking, and I felt stupid for not seeing the warning signs earlier. Around 6 a.m., a woman in her 40s came into the waiting room carrying a folder, and introduced herself as Evelyn Mott from the hospital social services. She sat down next to me, and her first words made my chest tighten. She said she needed me to understand that they were mandated reporters, and because Adriana had attempted to harm Emma, they were required by law to report this to Child Protective Services. I felt something cold spread through my stomach because I knew what CPS involvement meant. Knew it from stories I'd heard about families torn apart and kids taken away. Evelyn must have seen my face change because she reached over and put her hand on my arm, speaking gently but clearly. She explained this wasn't about taking Emma away if we cooperated fully with safety planning, that their goal was to keep families together when possible. But she was firm when she said Emma's safety was the absolute priority and non-negotiable, that everything else came second to making sure our daughter was protected. She asked if I understood, and I managed to nod, even though my throat felt tight. Dr. Watkins came back around 8 a.m. with papers in her hand and asked Dr. Powell to step aside with her. I watched them reviewing something together near the nurse's station, and Dr. Watkins looked troubled, pointing at numbers on the printout and shaking her head slightly. They came back over, and Dr. Watkins explained that Adriana's initial lab results were back. Her iron and ferritin were low again, but not as critically low as they'd been during her pregnancy, which confused me until Dr. Powell explained what that meant. He said if the blood cravings were purely driven by physical deficiency like before, her levels would be much worse, dangerously depleted. The fact that they were only moderately low suggested something else was going on this time. Dr. Powell sat down across from me and laid it out in straightforward terms. He said we were likely dealing with a psychiatric component, possibly postpartum OCD, where obsessive thoughts about harming Emma had manifested as these compulsive blood cravings. Or it could be a rare form of postpartum psychosis with specific delusions about needing blood. Either way, Adriana required inpatient psychiatric care, not just the medical treatment that had worked during her pregnancy. He said they were admitting her to the psychiatric unit on a 72-hour hold for evaluation and stabilization. I asked if I could see her before they moved her upstairs, and he said yes, but it would be supervised and brief. A nurse took me and Emma to a small exam room where Adriana was sitting on the bed in a hospital gown, her wrists bare after they'd removed her wedding ring and watch per protocol. She looked terrified when she saw us, her eyes red from crying, and she immediately started apologizing. She said she was sorry over and over, begging me not to hate her, reaching toward Emma but stopping herself before actually touching her. I told her I didn't hate her, and that was true, but I also told her I couldn't let her near Emma unsupervised until the doctors said it was safe. She nodded, and more tears ran down her face, and then the nurse said, time was up. Around 10 a.m., a man in his early 30s came into the waiting room and introduced himself as Sebastian Arias from Child Protective Services. He was younger than I expected, wearing khakis and a button-down shirt, and he pulled out a notebook as he sat down. He explained he was there to interview me and begin the intake process, that he needed to understand the full history of what had been happening. I went through everything, starting from Adriana's pregnancy cravings, the diagnosis of severe anemia and pica, the successful treatment and delivery, and then the 6 months of seeming normalcy before tonight's incident at Emma's crib. Sebastian took detailed notes and asked clarifying questions, wanting exact dates and specific details about the medical supplies Adriana had hidden. When I finished, he explained the immediate safety plan in clear terms. Adriana could not have any unsupervised contact with Emma until she was cleared by both psychiatry and CPS. All medical supplies and sharp objects had to be locked away at home in a secure location. I needed to identify a backup caregiver in case of emergency, someone who could take Emma if something happened to me. He said he'd conduct a home visit within 48 hours to verify I'd complied with all the safety requirements. I took Emma home around noon after signing paperwork and getting instructions from 3 different people. The house felt different when I walked in, like something had changed in the walls themselves. I put Emma in her bouncy seat and started walking through every room, looking for anything Adriana could potentially use to draw blood. I found my old diabetic testing supplies from a health scare I'd had years ago, still in the bathroom cabinet with the lancets and test strips. I gathered up sewing needles from Adriana's craft drawer, safety pins from the junk drawer, even Emma's tiny nail clippers because they had a sharp point. Everything went into a fireproof lockbox I'd bought for important documents, and I locked it with a combination only I knew. My hands were shaking the whole time, and I kept thinking about how I was literally child-proofing my house against my own wife. I called my boss once Emma was down for her afternoon nap and tried to explain I needed emergency family leave. I kept the details vague, just saying my wife was hospitalized with serious postpartum complications and I needed to be home with the baby. He didn't push for more information, just said he was approving 2 weeks immediately and we'd figure out more time if I needed it. His quick understanding made me want to cry with relief because I had no idea how long this was going to take or what came next. And knowing I wouldn't lose my job on top of everything else felt like the only good thing that had happened all day. I hauled Emma's crib down the hallway and positioned it right next to my bed, close enough that I could reach through the rails and touch her without getting up. The baby monitor I ordered online arrived that afternoon with same-day delivery, and I spent an hour mounting the camera on the wall where it had a clear view of her entire crib. The app on my phone showed me the live feed, and I set it to record continuously to cloud storage that only I could access. Adriana wasn't even here, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw her standing over Emma with that needle, and I needed proof that Emma was breathing, that she was safe, that nothing was happening to her while I slept. I tested the camera 3 times, checking different angles and making sure the night vision worked, before I felt okay leaving Emma in there for even a minute. That first full day alone with Emma wore me down in ways I didn't expect. She wasn't fussy or difficult, actually slept pretty well for a 6-month-old, but I jumped at every single sound. The refrigerator humming made me check the kitchen. The house settling made me walk through every room. A car door outside sent me to the window to see who it was. I checked every lock 4 times before lunch, then checked them all again an hour later because I couldn't remember if I'd actually done it or just thought about doing it. Emma went down for her afternoon nap, and I knew I should sleep too because I'd been up since 2 a.m., but I couldn't make myself relax. I sat on the couch watching the baby monitor feed on my phone, watching her chest rise and fall, counting her breaths until my eyes burned. My phone rang around 7 p.m. and Dr. Powell's name showed on the screen. He told me Adriana had been cooperative with the full psychiatric evaluation, answering all their questions honestly and showing genuine distress about what had almost happened. She'd admitted to having intrusive thoughts about drawing Emma's blood for about 3 weeks, starting subtle but getting stronger until last night, when the urge became overwhelming. He'd started her on medication for OCD that morning, a combination that should help with both the intrusive thoughts and the compulsive urges, and they were monitoring her response closely over the next few days. I asked if she was getting better, and he said it was too early to tell, but her willingness to engage with treatment was a positive sign. The next morning, I was moving the couch to vacuum underneath it, trying to keep busy, when I spotted something wedged behind the cushions, a small black zippered case, the kind you'd use for makeup or travel toiletries. My hands shook as I pulled it out and unzipped it. Inside were alcohol swabs still in their sterile packets, a blue tourniquet, and 3 unused needles in plastic wrappers, and a small spiral notebook, the kind you buy at the dollar store. I opened it and saw Adriana's handwriting, pages and pages of entries. Dates and times going back 3 weeks. 2:15 a.m., craving level 7, triggered by Emma's crying. 3:40 a.m., craving level 9, couldn't stop thinking about it. 11:30 p.m., craving level 8, went to nursery, but came back. Each entry had a number rating and notes about what made it worse or better. The last entry was dated 2 nights ago, the night before she'd stood over Emma's crib. Craving level 10, can't fight it anymore. I'm losing. Reading her desperate handwriting, seeing how she'd tried to track and manage something she couldn't control, broke something in me. I called the psychiatric unit and asked about visiting hours, then drove to the hospital with the notebook in my jacket pocket. Dr. Powell met me in the hallway outside Adriana's room, and I handed him the notebook without saying anything. He flipped through it slowly, his expression getting more serious with each page. We went into Adriana's room together, and she was sitting on the bed in the hospital scrubs, looking small and tired. Dr. Powell showed her the notebook and asked her to walk us through what she'd been documenting. She started crying immediately, but explained through the tears that she'd been trying to manage the cravings on her own for weeks. She thought if she could just track them, understand the patterns, maybe figure out how to make them stop, she wouldn't have to tell anyone. She'd hoped they would go away like they did after pregnancy, that it was just temporary, but they only got stronger. By the end, she was writing in the notebook multiple times a night, rating the intensity, trying anything to resist. Dr. Powell pulled a chair close to Adriana's bed and helped us have a conversation I didn't want to have but needed to. He asked Adriana to explain the difference between the thoughts and what she actually wanted, and she struggled to put it into words. She said the intrusive thoughts felt like they came from outside her, like something foreign in her brain, telling her to do things she found horrible. She never wanted to hurt Emma, loved her more than anything, but the compulsive urge felt overwhelming, like an addiction she couldn't control no matter how hard she tried. Dr. Powell explained this was characteristic of severe OCD, where the person is genuinely horrified by their own thoughts, but feels compelled to act on them anyway. The thoughts and the person's actual desires are completely opposite, which is why it causes so much distress. He said the medication should help reduce both the frequency and intensity of the intrusive thoughts, and therapy would teach her better coping strategies than just trying to resist through willpower alone. Sebastian showed up at the house on day 3, right after lunch when Emma was napping. He had a clipboard and camera and spent over an hour going through every single room. He opened the lockbox and photographed the contents, checked that I'd actually locked it and not just closed it. He inspected the baby monitor camera, tested it from different angles, took pictures of Emma's crib positioned in my bedroom. He opened every cabinet in the kitchen and bathroom, checked the medicine cabinet, even looked in the garage. He documented everything in his case file with notes and timestamps and photos. When he finished the inspection, Sebastian sat down at the kitchen table and explained what happened next. Family court would issue a temporary protective order within the next few days, laying out exactly what kind of contact Adriana could have with Emma. All visits would need to be supervised by either a professional or someone the court approved, probably at the hospital or a neutral location. Adriana would need to complete the full psychiatric treatment program and demonstrate consistent medication compliance before they'd consider any changes. I would need to maintain all the safety measures indefinitely, keep the supplies locked up, keep the cameras running, document everything. He wasn't unkind about it, just matter of fact, treating this like a process we'd work through together step by step. After Sebastian left, I went to the hardware store and bought more cabinet locks, the kind with actual keys instead of the plastic childproof ones. I installed them on every kitchen cabinet and both bathroom cabinets, anywhere Adriana might find something sharp or potentially dangerous. I bought a small medication safe, the kind with a combination lock, and put it inside the larger lockbox for extra security. Then I created a written log in a composition notebook, the kind with sewn binding so pages couldn't be removed. I started tracking everything related to Emma, feeding times and amounts, diaper changes, sleep schedule, any visitors to the house, even my own mental state each day. Dr. Powell had suggested documentation would help if there were ever questions about Emma's care or my ability to parent alone. That evening, someone knocked on the front door, and I checked the peephole to see Damon from 3 houses down. He was holding a casserole dish and looking uncomfortable. I opened the door, and he said he'd noticed all the police cars the other night and wanted to check if everything was okay. I felt embarrassed, but I was too exhausted to make up a story, so I gave him a simplified version about Adriana having a serious postpartum mental health crisis and being hospitalized for treatment. I didn't mention the blood cravings or what she'd almost done, just said she was getting help and I was home alone with Emma for a while. Damon nodded and pulled out his phone, asking for my number so he could check in. I gave it to him, and he typed it in right there, then sent me a quick text so I'd have his contact saved. He told me to call anytime, day or night, even if I just needed someone to hold Emma while I took a shower or ran to the store. I felt something loosen in my chest because I'd been carrying everything alone, too ashamed to admit what was happening, and here was someone offering help without making me feel like a failure. I thanked him, and he squeezed my shoulder before heading back down the driveway, and I watched him go before closing the door and locking it behind me. 4 days later, a thick envelope arrived in the mail with the county court seal stamped on the front. I opened it standing in the kitchen while Emma played on her activity mat, and I had to read the first page 3 times before the words made sense. Temporary protective order. Supervised contact only. No unsupervised access to minor child. The legal language made everything feel official and permanent, like we'd crossed a line we couldn't step back over. There were dates for hearings and conditions for Adriana's contact with Emma and requirements for my compliance with safety measures. I folded the papers and put them in a drawer because I couldn't look at them anymore, but I kept thinking about how we'd gone from a normal family to this in less than a week. The first supervised visit happened 2 days later at the hospital in a small family room on the psychiatric floor. Violet Hines met me in the lobby and walked us upstairs, explaining she'd be present the entire time and would end the visit if she observed any concerning behavior. She was kind but professional, making notes on a clipboard as we rode the elevator up. Adriana was already in the room when we arrived, sitting in a chair by the window and looking thinner than I remembered. She stood up when she saw Emma and started crying before she even touched her. I handed Emma over, and Adriana held her carefully, like she was afraid Emma might break, kissing her forehead over and whispering how sorry she was. Emma just cooed and grabbed at Adriana's hair because she was 6 months old and had no idea her mother had almost hurt her. I sat across the room watching while Violet took notes, and the whole thing felt wrong and sad and necessary all at once. 3 days after that, I took Emma for her 6-month checkup at the pediatrician's office. The doctor measured and weighed her, checked her reflexes and her hearing, and declared she was hitting all her marks perfectly. He asked routine questions about her sleep and feeding and development, and I answered them all normally, until he asked if there were any concerns at home. That's when I lost it completely, breaking down in the exam room and telling him everything about Adriana's condition and the incident and the court order. He listened without interrupting, then handed me tissues and told me firmly that I'd done exactly the right thing protecting Emma and getting Adriana help. He documented everything in Emma's chart and gave me his personal cell number in case I needed anything, and I left feeling like at least one person understood how hard this was. That night, after I put Emma to bed in the crib next to mine, I walked into the nursery we'd set up when Adriana was pregnant. We'd painted it pale yellow together and hung curtains with little elephants on them. I sat in the rocking chair in the dark and finally let myself cry for real. Not the quick tears I'd been shoving down, but actual sobbing that shook my whole body. I cried for Adriana dealing with something she couldn't control, for Emma, who deserved parents who weren't a mess, and for myself, because I was scared and tired and didn't know how to fix any of this. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes just letting it all out, until I heard Emma fussing through the monitor, and then I wiped my face and went back to being a dad. Adriana started texting me the next morning, sending messages asking how Emma slept and what she ate for breakfast, and whether she was smiling more. I sent back a picture of Emma in her high chair with mashed banana on her face, and a short response about her morning routine. The texts kept coming throughout the day, apologies mixed with questions and updates about her therapy sessions. Dr. Powell called me that afternoon and suggested I maintain some boundaries while Adriana was in treatment, keeping my responses factual instead of emotional. He explained it would help both of us process things separately before we tried to reconnect as a couple. So I kept texting her pictures and basic information, but stopped responding to the apologies and the personal stuff. A flyer at the hospital mentioned a support group for partners of people with perinatal mental health problems, run by someone named Maya Terrell. I forced myself to go to the next meeting, even though the idea of sitting in a circle talking about my feelings made me want to hide. There were 6 other people there, mostly men, but 2 women, and Maya had us introduce ourselves and share why we came. I gave the basic version about Adriana's postpartum crisis, and everyone nodded like they understood. Then they told their stories, and I heard about postpartum psychosis, where a woman thought her baby was possessed, severe depression, where someone couldn't get out of bed for weeks, and anxiety so bad a new mom couldn't let anyone else hold her baby. Hearing that other people were living through similar nightmares made me feel less alone, like maybe we could actually survive this. I called my brother that weekend after avoiding his calls for 2 weeks. He'd been asking if everything was okay, and I'd been saying we were fine, just busy with the baby. But sitting in that support group made me realize I needed to tell someone in my family the truth. So I called him back and explained everything from the pregnancy cravings to finding Adriana at the crib to the psychiatric hold and court order. He was quiet for a long time, then said he was coming to visit next weekend to help with Emma. He offered to take time off work, bring groceries, do whatever I needed. Just having him know what was really happening lifted some of the weight I'd been carrying alone. Dr. Powell called again after Adriana had been in treatment for 2 weeks. He reported her medication was working better than expected, and the intrusive thoughts about blood had dropped from happening multiple times a day to maybe once or twice. She was learning ways to manage the cravings when they did show up, using breathing exercises and thought-stopping techniques. The medical side was improving too, because they'd put her on iron supplements, and her levels were coming back up. He said she was doing the work and taking it seriously, which gave me the first real hope I'd felt since this started. Sebastian scheduled a case review meeting at the CPS office for the following week. I sat across from him at a conference table while he reviewed his notes and Adriana's treatment reports. He said based on her progress, he wanted to propose slowly expanding her time with Emma through longer supervised visits and maybe eventually day passes where she could leave the hospital for a few hours. I cut him off immediately and said it was too soon, that I wasn't comfortable with any unsupervised contact yet, that 2 weeks of medication wasn't enough to prove anything. He nodded and wrote down my concerns in his file, explaining my input would be part of the court's decision, but they'd ultimately decide based on professional recommendations and risk assessment. I left feeling like I'd been heard, but also like I had no real control over what happened next. Dr. Powell called me back 2 days after that meeting with Sebastian. He wanted to discuss the timeline face-to-face, so I drove to his office during Emma's afternoon nap, while Damon watched her through the monitor. Dr. Powell sat across from me in his consultation room and pulled up Adriana's treatment notes on his tablet. He scrolled through several pages of detailed observations before looking up at me. He said Sebastian had contacted him about expanding Adriana's access to Emma, and he wanted me to know he'd pushed back on that idea. Adriana was showing good progress with medication compliance and therapy participation, but 2 weeks wasn't enough time to prove she could manage the cravings consistently in real-world situations. He told Sebastian they needed at least another month of stable symptoms before considering any changes to the supervision arrangement. They agreed to weekly progress reviews where Dr. Powell would update Sebastian on specific markers like craving frequency, intensity ratings, and Adriana's use of coping skills when urges hit. I felt relief wash through my chest because someone with actual authority was backing up my concerns instead of pushing me to trust faster than I was ready. 3 weeks into her hospitalization, Adriana moved from the locked inpatient unit to a partial hospitalization program. This meant she attended intensive therapy sessions from 8 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon, then stayed overnight at a supervised residential facility about 2 miles from the hospital. The facility had staff on duty around the clock and strict rules about medications, room checks, and sign-in procedures. Violet called me to arrange what she called a trial home visit, 2 hours at our house with her present the entire time to observe how Adriana interacted with Emma and managed any stress or triggers. We scheduled it for a Saturday morning when I didn't have to worry about work calls or other distractions. I spent Friday night cleaning the house obsessively, checking and rechecking that the lockbox was secure and all the cabinet locks were functioning properly. Adriana arrived with Violet at 10 in the morning, and I opened the door, feeling my stomach twist into knots. Adriana looked better than she had in weeks, more color in her face and steadier on her feet. She hugged me briefly at the doorway, then immediately asked where Emma was. I brought Emma from her playmat in the living room, and Adriana's whole face transformed when she saw our daughter. She held Emma carefully, supporting her head and talking to her in that soft voice she'd always used. For the next 90 minutes, everything went smoothly. Adriana fed Emma a bottle, changed her diaper on the living room floor because I'd removed the changing table from the nursery and played peekaboo while Emma giggled and grabbed at her hands. Violet sat in the armchair taking notes on a clipboard, occasionally asking Adriana questions about how she was feeling or if anything was triggering her. Adriana answered honestly each time, reporting her craving level was at a 2 out of 10 and she was using breathing techniques Dr. Powell had taught her. After Adriana and Violet left, I went to throw away Emma's diaper in the bathroom trash can and spotted a small bandage wrapper at the bottom of the bin. My heart started hammering immediately. I grabbed my phone and called Violet before I could think it through, my words tumbling out about finding medical waste and Adriana somehow accessing supplies during the visit. Violet asked me to send her a photo of the wrapper, which I did with shaking hands. She called back 3 minutes later and pulled up her supervision logs. The wrapper was from Adriana's routine blood draw that morning at the residential facility for her medication level monitoring, and she must have forgotten it was stuck to her sleeve when she arrived. Violet walked me through the timestamp and showed me the lab order in the system. I sat down on the bathroom floor feeling stupid and paranoid, but also recognizing this was going to be my reality for a long time. Every bandage, every unexplained mark, every medical supply in the trash was going to send me into panic mode until I could retrain my brain to stop seeing threats everywhere. We started a new system that week based on Dr. Powell's suggestion. Adriana called every evening at 7, right before Emma's bedtime routine. I'd put the phone on speaker and let Emma babble and coo while Adriana talked to her, telling her about her day in therapy or what she'd eaten for dinner. The calls lasted about 15 minutes and gave Adriana consistent contact without requiring me to arrange supervised visits multiple times per week. We also created a shared safety checklist using a phone app where Adriana logged specific information each day, medication taken with timestamps, therapy sessions attended with the therapist's initials, cravings intensity rated on a scale where 1 meant barely noticeable and 10 meant overwhelming compulsion, coping skills used when cravings hit, whether that was breathing exercises, calling her crisis line, or using the thought-stopping techniques from cognitive behavioral therapy. I could see her entries in real time, and Sebastian had access too for his monitoring reports. The system worked well for about 3 weeks. Adriana's craving ratings stayed mostly between 2 and 4, with occasional spikes to 6 or 7 that she managed using her coping skills. Then one evening during our regular call, Adriana asked if she could have unsupervised visits at the residential facility where staff were nearby but not directly watching. She said other patients in the partial program got unsupervised time with their kids in the common areas, and she felt ready for that step. I told her no immediately, that I wasn't comfortable with any unsupervised contact yet, regardless of how close staff might be. Adriana's voice changed, getting sharp and frustrated. She said I was being overprotective and punishing her for something she couldn't control, that she was doing everything the doctors asked and following every rule perfectly. I responded that following rules for a month didn't erase what happened at the crib, and I needed more time to trust her judgment around Emma. She hung up on me, and I sat there staring at my phone, feeling angry and guilty in equal measure. The argument stuck with me for days. I kept wondering if I was being too rigid, if my fear was preventing Adriana from recovering properly. But I also couldn't shake the memory of her standing over Emma's crib with that needle, and every time I thought about unsupervised visits, my chest got tight. I decided to call Colin Buckner, a family law attorney whose name Evelyn had given me weeks ago. His office got me in for a consultation that Thursday afternoon. Colin was probably in his 50s, with gray hair and a calm way of speaking that made me feel less like I was losing my mind. I explained the whole situation from the pregnancy cravings through the current dispute about visitation. He listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he explained my legal position clearly. I couldn't permanently prevent Adriana from seeing Emma because she had parental rights that courts took seriously. However, I could advocate strongly for continued supervision until there was clear evidence of sustained recovery, meaning months of stability rather than weeks. Courts generally prioritized child safety over parental convenience in situations involving mental health crises that targeted the child. He said if Adriana pushed for unsupervised access through the court system, I should document everything, keep detailed logs, and make sure Dr. Powell and Sebastian were prepared to testify about appropriate timelines for reducing restrictions. Dr. Powell called me the next week with additional recommendations for the house. He wanted us to install a medical-grade sharps container in a locked cabinet, the kind hospitals used for disposing of needles safely. He also suggested conducting weekly audits of the lockbox contents, photographing everything inside, and comparing it to a master inventory list to make sure nothing had been removed or added. The most significant change was a written safety contract he'd drafted with Adriana during therapy. The contract listed specific behaviors and boundaries she agreed to maintain, including never being alone with Emma without approved supervision, immediately reporting any cravings above a 5 on the intensity scale, and submitting to random room searches at the residential facility if staff requested them. Adriana had already signed it, and Dr. Powell wanted me to review and sign as well, so we all had the same understanding of expectations. I read through the 3-page document that night after putting Emma to bed. Seeing our family situation reduced to legal language and behavioral clauses made me feel sad in a way I couldn't quite name, but I signed it anyway, because Emma's safety mattered more than my feelings about how far we'd fallen from normal. 6 weeks into Adriana's treatment, my phone rang at 2 in the morning. I jerked awake in bed, my first thought going immediately to Emma, but she was sleeping peacefully in her crib next to me. The caller ID showed Adriana's cell number. I answered and heard her crying on the other end, words tumbling out in a rush. She'd woken up with intense cravings, the worst she'd experienced since starting treatment, rating them at a 9. She'd gotten out of bed and walked to our garage, which still had some of her old belongings stored there, including the mini fridge where she used to keep my blood during her pregnancy. She'd opened the fridge and stood there staring at the empty shelves for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then she'd forced herself to close it, go back inside the residential facility, and call her crisis line before calling me. I sat up in bed, fully awake now, and alarmed that she'd gone that far before stopping herself. I asked if the crisis counselor was still with her, and she said yes. They were sitting in the common room working through de-escalation techniques. I told her I was glad she called her safety supports instead of acting on the craving, but I was also scared by how close she'd come. We talked for another 10 minutes until her breathing steadied, and the crisis counselor took over. I called Dr. Powell's emergency line after we hung up to report the incident. He called back within 20 minutes and said he'd already heard from the crisis team. He told me that Adriana's immediate disclosure and use of her safety plan was actually a positive sign of self-awareness, that she'd recognized the danger and pulled herself back before crossing any lines. It was progress, even though it didn't feel that way to me, lying awake at 3 in the morning, imagining what could have happened if she'd found something in that fridge. Adriana had a follow-up appointment with the hematologist the next week to check her nutrient levels. Dr. Powell called me afterward with the results. Her iron, ferritin, B12, folate, and all the other markers they'd been tracking were now normal and stable. The intensive supplementation and intravenous treatments had worked, bringing her body back into proper balance. This should have been good news, but Dr. Powell explained what it actually meant. The persistent cravings weren't being driven by physical deficiency anymore. They were definitely psychiatric in nature, rooted in her OCD and the compulsive thought patterns that had developed during her pregnancy when the cravings did have a medical basis. Her brain had learned to associate blood with relief and safety, and now that neural pathway was firing even without the nutritional need behind it. This clarified the treatment focus going forward, but also meant there was no simple physical fix, no supplement or infusion that would make the cravings disappear. She needed ongoing psychiatric care and therapy to rewire those thought patterns, which could take months or even years. Dr. Powell introduced a new treatment approach during Adriana's next therapy phase. He called it exposure and response prevention therapy, a specialized technique for treating OCD. The basic idea was that Adriana would practice being around triggering stimuli, like capped syringes or medical supplies, while resisting the compulsion to use them. She'd start with low-level triggers like pictures of medical equipment, then gradually work up to handling actual supplies under controlled conditions with her therapist present. The goal was to break the automatic connection between seeing the trigger and feeling compelled to act on it, teaching her brain that she could tolerate the discomfort without giving in to the urge. Dr. Powell warned me that Adriana was finding it incredibly difficult, that exposure sessions left her shaking and exhausted, but she'd committed to doing the work because she understood it was necessary for any chance of normal family life again. He sent me educational materials about ERP therapy so I could understand what she was going through and support the process appropriately. I read through the packet that night, learning about habituation curves and anxiety tolerance, and felt a strange mix of hope and dread about how long this road was going to be. Dr. Powell invited me to observe one of Adriana's therapy sessions the following week so I could understand the work she was doing. I sat in a chair against the wall while Adriana settled into the patient's seat across from Dr. Powell, her hands already fidgeting in her lap before the session even started. He pulled out a clear plastic case containing a capped syringe and set it on the small table between them. Adriana's whole body went stiff, and her breathing got faster just looking at it sitting there. Dr. Powell explained the process in a calm voice, telling her she'd hold the syringe for increasing time intervals while using the breathing techniques they'd practiced, and I watched as she reached out with a shaking hand to pick it up. Her fingers wrapped around the barrel, and immediately her knuckles went white from gripping it so hard. She closed her eyes and started the breathing pattern, counting slowly while her jaw clenched tight. 30 seconds passed and sweat appeared on her forehead. At 45 seconds, her hand started trembling so badly I thought she'd drop it. Dr. Powell kept his voice steady, reminding her to notice the urge without acting on it, to let the discomfort exist without trying to fix it. She made it to 60 seconds before setting the syringe down hard on the table and pressing both hands against her thighs. The effort left her looking exhausted, like she'd just run a mile, and I felt this weird mix of being proud that she was fighting this hard, while also being scared because if holding a capped syringe for 1 minute took this much work, how long until she could be trusted alone with Emma? We did 3 more rounds, each one lasting slightly longer, and by the end, Adriana was shaking all over and had tears running down her face, but she'd made it to 90 seconds on the last attempt. Dr. Powell praised her progress, and I nodded along, but driving home I couldn't shake the image of how badly her hands had trembled while fighting the urge to use that needle. Saturday morning, 2 weeks later, I was feeding Emma breakfast when someone knocked on the door at 8:30. I opened it to find Sebastian standing there with his tablet and that same professional expression he always wore. I felt annoyed immediately because we had a scheduled check-in on Monday, and this felt like he was trying to catch me doing something wrong. He must have seen it on my face because he explained right away that unannounced visits were standard protocol for ongoing monitoring cases, just to verify everything stayed in order between official appointments. I stepped back to let him in, and he did his usual walkthrough, checking the locked cabinet where I kept all the medical supplies and sharp objects, reviewing the safety log I'd been maintaining daily, and observing Emma playing happily in her bouncer. He took photos of the lockbox with its combination lock, the safety checklist posted on the fridge, and Emma's sleeping area still set up in my bedroom. Everything checked out exactly like it was supposed to, and he made notes in his tablet about the positive findings. He spent maybe 20 minutes total before thanking me for my cooperation and heading out. After he left, I felt relieved, but also frustrated that our lives were still under this level of scrutiny, that a CPS worker could just show up on a Saturday morning and inspect our house like we were criminals. 2 months into this whole nightmare, I started thinking maybe we could try something different. Adriana had been doing well in her treatment. Her craving ratings were down, and the supervised visits had gone smoothly for weeks, without any incidents. I brought it up during our next meeting with Dr. Powell and Violet, suggesting we could try a brief unsupervised visit at home with the camera system recording everything, and me staying in the next room ready to step in if needed. Dr. Powell looked at Adriana's progress charts and medication logs before agreeing it was a reasonable next step, given how far she'd come. Violet supported it too, but wanted clear parameters, so we settled on 30 minutes maximum, with me monitoring the camera feed from my phone the entire time. I agreed to the plan, but spent the next 3 days feeling sick with worry about it. The trial was scheduled for Thursday afternoon, and I barely slept the night before, running through every possible disaster scenario in my head. When Adriana arrived, I had my phone already open to the camera app. The volume turned all the way up, so I'd hear everything, and my finger hovering over the screen, ready to burst into the living room if anything seemed wrong. I positioned myself in the kitchen where I could reach Emma in seconds and watched Adriana pick her up from the playmat. The 30 minutes felt like 3 hours. I watched through the camera as Adriana fed Emma her bottle, talking softly to her and smiling when Emma grabbed her finger. She changed Emma's diaper efficiently, making silly faces that got Emma giggling. They played peekaboo with a blanket, and Adriana sang the alphabet song while helping Emma stack soft blocks. Every movement looked natural and loving, exactly how she'd been with Emma before everything went wrong. My heart pounded the entire time anyway, and I kept glancing at the clock, counting down the minutes. When the timer hit 30 minutes, I was already moving toward the living room, but Adriana stood up with Emma and walked toward the kitchen before I got there. She handed Emma to me carefully and said thank you for trusting her, and I saw tears in her eyes, but also something that looked like hope. I took Emma and checked her over completely, looking for any marks or signs of distress, but she was fine, just happy and babbling like normal. The visit had gone perfectly, but I still felt shaky with leftover fear. The next week, I took Emma to the grocery store and ended up in the checkout line behind 2 women from our street. They didn't notice me at first, and I heard one of them talking about the police cars that had been at our house months ago. She said something about postpartum psychosis and asked if Emma was still living there or if they'd taken her away. The other woman lowered her voice, but not enough, because I heard her say she'd seen Adriana getting into an ambulance and wondered if the baby was safe with me. I stood there frozen with my cart, Emma strapped in the seat reaching for a candy bar, while these women who'd waved at us at block parties speculated about whether my daughter was in danger. I had to decide right then whether to say something or just pretend I hadn't heard. I ended up clearing my throat loud enough that they both turned around and saw me. Their faces went red, and they suddenly got very interested in the magazine rack. I didn't say anything, just moved forward when the line advanced, but the whole interaction made me feel sick. Walking to the car, I realized the whole neighborhood probably knew something was wrong with Adriana, and they were all watching us and making guesses about what happened. Emma caught a cold the following week, and everything got harder. She was fussy and not sleeping well, her nose was running constantly, and she needed extra attention and comfort. I was exhausted from multiple night wakings, and Adriana chose that exact time to push for more unsupervised visits. She called Tuesday evening while I was trying to get Emma to take medicine and started talking about how well the trial visit had gone, suggesting we could do an hour next time, or maybe even 2 hours. I snapped at her that I couldn't think about that right now because Emma was sick and I was barely holding it together. She got defensive and said she could help if I'd just let her, that she was Emma's mother and had a right to be there when our daughter needed care. I told her she'd given up that right when she stood over Emma's crib with a needle, and I regretted it the second the words left my mouth. She went quiet for a long moment before saying, I was never going to trust her again, no matter how hard she worked or how much progress she made. I said that wasn't true, but she'd already hung up. I sat there holding my crying daughter and feeling like the worst person alive. Dr. Powell called the next morning and asked us both to come in for an emergency session that afternoon. My mom came over to watch Emma, and I drove to his office feeling like I might throw up. Adriana was already there when I arrived, sitting in the waiting room with red eyes and tissues balled up in her fist. We went into Dr. Powell's office, and he didn't waste time with small talk, just asked us each to explain what we were really afraid of. I said I was scared Emma would get hurt if I relaxed my guard too soon, that I'd never forgive myself if something happened, because I wanted to believe everything was fine when it wasn't. Adriana cried and said she was scared of losing us permanently, of doing all this work and still ending up alone, because I'd decided she was too dangerous to ever be a real mother again. Dr. Powell listened to both of us, and then said he was adjusting Adriana's medication to address the increased anxiety she'd been experiencing. He also helped us create a written crisis response plan for when tensions got this high, with specific steps we'd each take before things escalated into another blow-up. We left with the plan printed out and an agreement to check in with him twice a week instead of once. The family court review happened at the 10-week mark, and we all had to appear in person. The judge reviewed Sebastian's reports, Dr. Powell's treatment summaries, and Violet's visit logs before asking Adriana some direct questions about her progress and current symptoms. Adriana answered honestly, explaining the medication changes and therapy work she'd been doing, admitting the cravings still occurred, but at much lower intensity and frequency. The judge looked at me and asked if I felt Emma was safe during supervised visits, and I said yes. They'd all gone well with no concerning incidents. After reviewing everything, the judge said Adriana had made substantial progress and shown good compliance with all treatment requirements. She maintained the supervised contact order, but scheduled another review in 6 weeks, with the possibility of moving to less restrictive arrangements if progress continued at this rate. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt relieved the order wasn't getting stricter, but also frustrated we were still months away from any kind of normal family life. Money became a serious problem around this same time. I'd been on unpaid leave from work for 2 months, and our savings were almost gone. Adriana's treatment costs were adding up fast, because insurance only covered part of the partial hospitalization program and none of the specialized therapy. The legal fees from consulting Colin and dealing with the court stuff had eaten up another chunk. I sat down one night and looked at our bank statements and credit card bills and realized we were in trouble. I put my truck up for sale that weekend and bought a cheaper used car with the difference, which freed up some cash but felt like another piece of our old life disappearing. We cut every expense we could think of, canceling streaming services and meal kit deliveries, buying generic everything at the store, skipping any purchase that wasn't absolutely necessary. The financial stress added another layer to everything else we were dealing with, and I started having trouble sleeping even when Emma slept through the night. I decided we needed more structure and visibility around safety, so I created a detailed home safety plan and printed it out on bright yellow paper. I posted it on the refrigerator where anyone could see it, listing emergency contacts with phone numbers for Dr. Powell, Violet, Sebastian, Poison Control, and 911. I added Adriana's medication schedule with times and dosages, the locations of all locked supplies with notes about who had keys, and a daily safety checklist that covered everything from securing sharp objects to checking camera batteries. Having it all written down and visible made me feel slightly more in control of the situation, like we had a system instead of just reacting to whatever happened next. Adriana saw it during her next supervised visit and didn't say anything, just read through it carefully and nodded. I think she understood that the structure helped me feel safer, and feeling safer meant I might eventually be able to relax enough to trust her more. We weren't fixed, and we weren't back to normal, but we had plans and systems and people helping us, and some days that felt like enough to keep going. Evelyn called me 3 days later with a proposal that made sense, but also felt like another big change. She explained that the partial hospitalization program had residential beds available 4 nights a week, which would let Adriana stay there Sunday through Wednesday while continuing her intensive treatment during the day. This would give me regular breaks to sleep without worrying about monitoring everything, and it would give Adriana more structure and support during the hardest part of the week when cravings tended to spike. I agreed immediately because honestly, I was running on empty and needed the help. We set it up so Adriana would come home Thursday through Saturday for supervised visits, then return to the facility Sunday evening. The first Sunday, she packed a small bag, and I drove her to the facility, which looked more like a nice apartment building than a hospital. She seemed nervous, but also relieved to have more support around her. I kissed her goodbye in the parking lot and drove home with Emma, and the house felt different, knowing Adriana wouldn't be there that night. I gave Emma her bath that evening and realized halfway through that I was actually enjoying it instead of feeling tense and watchful. She splashed and laughed, and I made silly faces at her without that constant fear sitting in my chest. Bedtime went smoothly, too, with her usual routine of bottle, rocking, and lullabies, and when I laid her in the crib, she went right to sleep. I sat on the couch afterward and felt guilty for feeling so relieved that Adriana wasn't there. It seemed wrong to feel better without my wife in the house, but I couldn't deny that the constant watching and worrying had been wearing me down more than I'd realized. I actually watched a TV show that night instead of staring at the baby monitor, and I didn't check the locks 3 times before bed. That first night, I slept straight through until Emma woke up at 6, which hadn't happened since the night I found Adriana at the crib. I woke up feeling like a different person, almost human again instead of running on adrenaline and fear. Emma was babbling happily in her crib when I went to check on her, reaching up for me with both hands. I changed her diaper and made her bottle, and for those few morning minutes everything felt manageable and normal. The sun was coming through the kitchen window while I fed her, and she kept smiling at me between gulps of formula. I thought maybe we could actually get through this, if I could just get regular sleep and have some space to breathe. The guilt came back later when I texted Adriana good morning, and she replied asking how Emma slept, because I knew Adriana was struggling in the facility while I was home feeling better. But Dr. Powell had told me I needed to take care of myself too, that I couldn't help Emma or Adriana if I was completely burned out. The week started following a pattern after that, with Adriana gone Sunday through Wednesday and home for supervised visits Thursday through Saturday. At 12 weeks, Dr. Powell called me in for an update meeting and showed me charts tracking Adriana's craving intensity over time. The daily ratings had dropped from consistent 8s and 9s down to occasional 3s and 4s, and some days she reported no cravings at all. He explained that the medication was working well and she was using her coping skills every time the urges came up, instead of trying to fight them alone. She'd gained back the 15 pounds she'd lost during the crisis, and her color looked better in the photos he showed me from her therapy sessions. Her medication adherence was perfect, according to the facility logs, taking everything on schedule without missing a single dose. He said she was doing the hard work of therapy, really engaging with the exposure exercises, and being honest about her thoughts and feelings. I felt proud of her for that, even though I was still scared and couldn't imagine things going back to normal anytime soon. Sebastian scheduled a case review meeting at his office the next week, and I brought all my documentation with me in a thick folder. He reviewed the home visit reports, the safety logs I'd been keeping, the medication records, and Dr. Powell's treatment summaries. Everything showed sustained compliance with the safety measures and steady progress in Adriana's treatment. He leaned back in his chair and told me that based on the documentation and progress, CPS was officially scaling back to monitoring-only status. This meant no more weekly check-ins or unannounced visits, just monthly calls to verify everything was still stable. He handed me a step-down schedule showing that if progress continued for another 6 weeks, the case would close completely with a safety plan filed, but no active monitoring. I asked what would happen if something went wrong, and he said any incident would restart the full investigation, but right now, everything pointed towards successful case closure. Walking out of his office, I felt lighter than I had in months, like maybe we were actually moving toward the other side of this nightmare. Adriana and I had a video call that Thursday that turned into the hardest conversation we'd had since everything started. She wanted to talk about us, about our marriage, and whether I still wanted to be with her after everything that happened. I was honest and told her I didn't know, that I still loved her, but I was also scared and tired and needed time to figure out what I felt beyond just managing the crisis. She started crying, but she understood, saying she'd been thinking the same thing and didn't want me staying with her just out of obligation or pity. We decided on a temporary separation with a structured co-parenting plan where she'd continue staying at the residential facility even on her nights off, while gradually increasing supervised visits with Emma. We'd reassess our relationship after she completed the full treatment program, which was scheduled to run another 3 months. It hurt to make it official, to admit we couldn't just go back to being married like before, but it also felt honest and necessary. She asked if I'd still come to her therapy sessions when Dr. Powell invited me, and I said yes, because I wanted to support her recovery, even if I wasn't sure about us as a couple. 3 months after the initial crisis, I went back to work part-time, starting with 3 days a week. My boss had been incredibly understanding through everything, and he set me up with a flexible schedule so I could handle Emma's needs. I gave Damon and my brother both the daycare's number and my work number as backup emergency contacts, and Violet agreed to continue twice-weekly home visits to check on Emma and document her development. Having a routine outside the house helped me feel like myself again, like I had an identity beyond crisis management and constant vigilance. My coworkers didn't ask too many questions about where I'd been, just welcomed me back and caught me up on projects. I found myself actually thinking about work problems during the day instead of constantly worrying about Emma's safety, which felt like progress. The supervised visit at 14 weeks was different from all the previous ones. I watched through the camera feed as Adriana responded to Emma's cues perfectly, picking her up the moment she fussed and soothing her with gentle bouncing and soft words. When Emma got fussy during tummy time, Adriana switched to a different activity without prompting from Violet. She played peekaboo and read board books, doing all the age-appropriate stuff that showed she was really tuned into what Emma needed. There were no incidents, no concerning behaviors, no moments where I felt the need to intervene. Violet wrote in her notes that Adriana appeared genuinely bonded and safe with Emma, demonstrating appropriate maternal instincts and emotional regulation. Watching them together, I saw glimpses of the mother I'd imagined Adriana would be before everything went wrong, and it gave me hope that maybe she could get there again with enough time and treatment. I'm not naive enough to think we're completely past this, or that life will return to how it was before. The trust that got broken when I found her at Emma's crib won't repair quickly, and I still have moments of panic when I can't see Emma on the monitor. But we have a working plan now, with verified safety measures and professional support in place. Adriana's getting real help from people who understand her condition. Emma is protected and thriving, and I've learned that sometimes loving someone means maintaining boundaries even when it hurts. We're not fixed and we're not back to normal, but we're stable, and right now, that's enough. The court date for potentially lifting the protective order is scheduled for next month, and Dr. Powell thinks Adriana will be ready for unsupervised day visits by then. I'm taking it one day at a time, focusing on keeping Emma safe and healthy while supporting Adriana's recovery as much as I can. Some days are harder than others, but we're moving forward instead of just surviving, and that feels like real progress. I love ending videos like this because they remind me how good people can be. If you want more moments like that in your feed, hit subscribe and come back soon.